Hello, everybody. Today is a very sad day for us Pokemon Go players, and more specifically, those of us who like to remote raid across the world with our international friends. And you know already, if you've seen on social media, what's going to happen in a week's time, starting on April the 6th. But before we get into that, a little public service announcement for my community. Obviously, over the course of running this channel, I've built up a community, not just on YouTube, but on Discord as well, funneling people into that on the back of raid hours and raid streams and event streams, saying, you can join this Discord server, you can interact with people and all of that. And it looks like that might be in jeopardy, but I wanted to say this first and foremost, is that the server, the community will stay very much in place, and I would recommend everyone stays within the community as well, because you can still interact with people in the Discord globally. Obviously, the remote raid limit is going to impact how many you can do with various people across the world through remote raiding, but you can still be a part of the community. And of course, I need to address Patreon members as well. I will still very much be participating in raids with you, and hopefully you'll be participating with me. Again, we need to see how a few things are going to develop when this action actually takes place. Obviously, we'll have to bear in mind that with a daily remote limit, I won't be able to participate in as many raids with people as I once did, which is fundamentally a real shame. But let's get into the juice of what's a really vile fruit. The cheese fruit. Let's unbottle this cheese fruit smoothie that Niantic have served up for us. So this is the article that actually dropped on the 30th of March. Updates to Pokemon Go's remote raids. We'll just sort of do a very top line of this and give you the basic information. The changes, as I said, will go into effect on April the 6th, 11 AM PDT. So I think that's like 7 PM in the UK on April the 6th. Price adjustments. The price of the Remote Raid Pass 3-pack will increase from what it is currently of 300 coins up to 525 coins. The price of a single Remote Raid Pass will increase from what was 100 up to 195, almost a full double of the cost. A premium battle pass, the green passes that you can use, there will be a 3-pack of those added into the shop for a cost of 250 Pokecoins. So that's part of their want to get you out to use in-person raid passes. Remote Raid Pass participation limits. Trainers will be able to participate in a maximum of 5 remote raids per day. The maximum, as they say, may change for very special events. So I'd imagine things like Go Fests and a few other things. I can't imagine them changing it for raid days, to be honest, because this would go against the whole ethos of what they think is a problem with remote raids, which we'll get into later. Few other aspects to go through. Remote raid passes will be included as a bonus or a winning item that you can get through the research breakthrough. So the 7-day research breakthrough, you could get a remote raid pass. The limit you can have in your inventory, in your item bag, is still 3 remote raid passes. So you're still limited on how many you can hold at any one time. And as a result of that, if you actually have 3 in your item bag and you get a pass from your research breakthrough, it will turn into a green battle pass. You won't get a remote raid pass from your research breakthrough if you have 3 already in your inventory, which I think is a bit annoying, to be honest. And finally, Candy XL. Trainers who participate in 5-star raids in person will earn more XL candy than before. How much? We don't know. They don't say anything very specifically why they have initiated this change. And you may remember, I think in February, we saw a leaked text update, which we talked about actually on the podcast, where it said you can complete 6 remote raid passes per day. Then it was quickly removed, then there was something in the APK, then there wasn't. Finally, these nerfs have actually come into the game. On the back of this, since their introduction in 2020, remote raid passes have come to dominate the experience of playing Pokemon Go in a way we never intended. Rewarding trainers with additional XL candy and adding other new features are 2 ways that we're hoping to incentivize playing Pokemon Go's in person with your friends, family, and community. We plan to keep the remote raid passes as part of Pokemon Go, however we believe this change is necessary for the long-term health of the game. We feel this is a necessary step towards our goal of preserving and improving unique experience of playing Pokemon Go. Again, we hope you continue to enjoy into the future. That is what we've got told, and we're given a week's notice, which I think, to be honest, on the back of quite a few things, I think is a little bit poor with the short-term notice of such a major change to one of the main aspects or one of the core elements of the game since it was introduced 3 years ago. But we have seen that in the past, particularly with the Pokestop radius reduction, you may remember that back in 2021, they gave us a lot of notice, which enabled us a lot of time to talk as a global community, act, and we got the letter written up and we created #HeroesNiantic and all of that. And I do feel like giving us less time to react is almost a creative ploy to try and force this through anyway, despite any backlash. We know, fundamentally, that Niantic's core vision is in-person gameplay. That's why they push in-person Go Fest, they push in-person events. It's why they made the changes to the Community Day format back, actually same time last year. It was about March or April 2022. They want to push people meeting in person, people going to in-person events, people meeting up and going to specific way spots and all of that. Two things that we may remember from recent events. Firstly, the Elite Raids of Regidrago. It's all very well trying to push in-person events and experiences, but if you keep making catastrophic mistakes with in-person only events, people are not going to bother partaking in them because the words life and too short come immediately to mind. They still haven't sorted a makeup for the APAC players who got a double dose of not being able to do the raids. All we do know is that on April the 9th there's supposed to be round 2 with Regieleki. Whether they'll go smoother, we don't know. I sure hope so. That was one circumstance where in-person raid only, the format didn't work very well. We did get some people out, but you had people drifting in and out. Not everybody can abide to the same schedule. The other thing, the in-person event at Las Vegas. I'm sure you may have seen either through content on this channel or other channels, a lot of people went to Vegas and it was very, very badly handled. Just basically the fact that the signal didn't work. And you think, we've been doing live events in Pokemon Go since 2017. They still can't get to a point where you can get a group of people in one location in a park to play on a game that you develop and get the right amount of service and all of that there and get the servers to work and not be overloaded. It very much feels like they want to sail this ship, as it were, of in-person community meetups and raiding and all of that, and literally throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to the online communities that have blossomed over the last 3 years. If we were going to take a look at the weather outside now, it is chucking it down with rain. So I may very well want to go and do some raids, but no offence, it's chucking it down on a Friday afternoon and people are still at work. I won't be able to get an in-person community to come and do the raids with me. It's just not how life works, Niantic, unfortunately. They're desperately trying to push this in-person mentality, but the ship's got a bunch of holes in it. They're sailing in a sieve. Plug the holes that are causing the issues first before nerfing what is actually working. Yes, you get the occasional remote raid where it vomits you out or you do lose your pass, but you can actually get them back. It's an item, you can go through Niantic support to reclaim it. An event where raids for Regidrago are physically unable to be done, and it's a raid day, elite raid day, that's a major problem. But they haven't proven that they fixed any of the issues that plagued that day before trying to coax people to say, like, no, don't remote raid, come and do in-person raids instead. The incentive isn't there, and certainly I think the attempt to make in-person raids a little bit more zesty, increase in XL candy. As a bonus goes, I think that's a little bit flat, really. They could do definitely a lot more with it, like say, hey, if you do an in-person raid, you get 1.5 times XP. We've seen their attempt at this before, and we've seen cataclysmic errors and issues with it recently as well. We remember when they added rare XL candy into in-person raiding, and then you could get poffins as well. The rate that those items dropped, those premium in-person raid items dropped, has never ever been of any consequence to make anyone think I'm going to go and chain raid in person in my local area versus I can actually just get a bunch of raids done with some friends, interact with a lot of friends on your friends list from across the world through an online community, and get basically the same items anyway. Because the likelihood of you getting the premium items from the in-person experience was so low. It will be much the same, I think, with this XL Candy boost. You know, you might get one occasionally extra XL. I don't know, it doesn't say rare XL. It could be related to the Pokemon specifically, or it could be a rare XL. We don't know. For the last sort of, I think, 4 to 6 weeks, there has been an issue with the in-person raid rewards where Rare XL Candy and Poffins were both temporarily removed, and there was no word on why they were taken out of the pool of rewards. The very incentive for the last 6 weeks to try and go in and do an in-person raid hasn't been there. And I don't think boosting XL Candy from a catch is going to offset the negative impact that not being able to do a huge amount of remote raids actually offered. The two nerfs are extremely major, and in my view, and I think a lot of people share this sentiment, have been done very abruptly and I think incorrectly, to be honest, because it causes more harm than good to actually people who do play the game, such as rural players who have no option but to remote raid. They're being stung by a massive increase in cost. Fundamentally, there's also a lot of people and players who are disabled or have mobility issues who will be negatively impacted by this as well. The raiding remotely would have been the only way they could actually get various tier 5 or tier 4 mega raid bosses done. It's stinging them a lot harder than, for example, myself, where, you know, I can, due to what I do, I'm a content creator, I can go out and do X amount of in-person raids if I can find them, but also fundamentally then I may not have enough people to actually defeat Lugia that's here at the moment. Lugia, you need 4 competent trainers to do it at minimum. I won't be able to get 4 people in person, and I probably wouldn't be able to get 4 people via remote invites either, just because of the fact that maybe they've all hit their cap for the day. The price increase is extremely steep. That wasn't ever on the table in terms of the remote raids being nerfed, because cast your mind back, and actually it's currently listed as a seasonal bonus for the Rising Heroes season, and it's been a seasonal bonus ever since remote raids or seasons were even a thing. Increased damage for remote raiders, that was listed way back in 2020 or even early 2021. That was listed as a perk of remote raiding that was going to go away. And there is actually an article from Eurogamer where they talk with one of the head developers of Niantic, which we'll get onto a bit later. I think they haven't figured out how to do that yet, and trying to push in-person raiding, maybe they feel now is just the time to do it, and they've just gone, right, we've got a deadline, let's do it, let's go for it now. It's easier to increase price of an item in the shop and cap something than actually try to work out what percentage of damage, etc. the trainer should do, because, no offence, Niantic, they can't even get people to join into remote raids properly half of the time with glitches and bugs. I've had this when I've been doing remote raid invites in Europe on my raid hour streams, and it says, walk closer to the gym. You know, I can't. It's in Hamburg in Germany, and I'm in London in the UK. It's going to be a lot of money and time. The raid lobby is going to, funnily enough, elapse before I can get in range of the gym. There are too many issues and things like that, and I do think it was easier for them to implement the nerfs like this than to actually do what they said they would do way back nearly 3 years ago. However, I think that both of these nerfs together is just one massive kick in the stomach to people who do need the remote raid passes as just a core functionality of actually being able to partake in raids, and also the people who do raid a lot. It's like the thing they enjoy about the game. I'm in that boat as well. Raiding has been a huge part of the gameplay, certainly in the last couple of years on the channel. It's been a fantastic way to interact with so many people who support the content, the channel, or whatever around the globe. I don't know why Niantic think that's a bad thing, personally. In my view, there should have been one or the other. And I think that really the limit, it sort of makes sense in the way that they are trying to get people to go out and do raids rather than just sit at home and remote. But 5 a day, I think that's way too little. Because again, not everybody raids the same amount. In fact, I know there are plenty of people who may do 1 raid a day, Don't necessarily care for the legendaries. Let me know in the comments below where you sit in this camp. You know, are you somebody who raids heavily, or do you not really care? Everyone's entitled to play the game how they feel like it, but I don't think you should cut off a part of your player base who do like a function of the game that you implemented, Niantic, and back in 2020, it's been the most revitalising aspect of Pokemon Go. The game was getting flat and stale towards the end of 2019 and early 2020. Before the pandemic hit, we were going to have Abra Community Day, and then it happened, and then we had a whole wave of pandemic con days and stuff like that, but we had Trapinch con day. You know, raid bosses were getting stagnated and very slow. There's a lot of factors involved in this. We know for a fact, because if they were concerned about the money aspect, and I've seen that being touted around social media a lot, saying you're going to lose so much revenue. The reality is the amount of money that they get, they can see how much they've earned from remote raid passes, and it will have been a lot, but it won't be anywhere as near the amount of money that they get from selling the data that they collect from us, the people who play their games. All of the geo-tracking, the places we go to and visit, the things we interact with, the people who scan the stops, that do the AR scans for the quests, power up Pokestops, all of that, your adventure sync, all of that data is going into their stack where they built this whole thing on top of it, and they're selling that information. It's why we get sponsored stops, sponsored gyms, sponsored gifts from balloons. That's where they make their money. If money wasn't a problem, I don't see why they felt the need to increase the price of the remote raid pass so drastically if they're limiting the number you can use anyway. Vice versa, if you're going to massively increase the cost of it, you know, and try and utilise the in-game currency incentive and say like, hey, this costs way much more. If you do it in person, you know, it will cost you a lot less. Well, then why are you limiting the people who may actually not be able to go to do in-person raiding, but they could spend the Pokecoins to do 50 remote raids in a week? I think they've gone very hard on this nerf, and totally unnecessarily. The whole thing about the money collection, actually, and the data collection was actually summed up very well by jkim.net on one of his live streams very recently. And he is 100% correct, is that they don't really care about Pokemon Go. Pokemon Go is merely an avenue that has been developed on top of their information stack. Ingress was before it. It's a model platform that they've been building on top of ever since they were doing stuff, 2014 or something like that. Pokemon Go came out in 2016, and obviously they're banking off the back of a Pokemon franchise. It's huge, absolutely huge name, and I think they've been very lucky to be able to actually piggyback off the back of that, because with a lot of the stuff that's happened and gone wrong, and the way they've handled things, certainly with the community interactions and perhaps certain events, if it wasn't Pokemon Go, I think we'd be looking at another Wizards Unite. They'd made some money out of it, they got some data from it, and shut down. I don't think they'll do the same with Pokemon Go because of the fact that they've got the Pokemon Company involved and on their back in certain aspects of it. I know I'm waffling, but the huge amount of potential for this mobile game is extraordinary. And I feel like they are just sort of, they're cutting it off at the stem, almost, at every single opportunity in turn, because the remote raids have been such a huge thing for 3 years. Massively increasing the interactions globally. There are people I would never have interacted with and then subsequently met at live events had it not been for remote raiding as a function. One thing that I thought was an interesting suggestion from one of my local squad, why a daily limit? Because you could easily have a weekly limit on remote raiding, and you choose, give the player, the trainer, the choice of when they use their remote raid passes over the course of the week, because some people may play heavily one day on a weekend. Not everybody's going to do 5 remote raids per day, every week. Thanks, Tom, by the way, for the suggestion. Something else that cropped up in my head, and it's been perfectly demonstrated over the last sort of month of raid bosses, not every raid boss is equal. Prime example, if you were to compare the amount of interactions that, for example, Rayquaza gets versus Cresselia in Tier 5 raids, we saw fundamentally, actually, an even better demonstration would be Hoenn. Everybody was chasing the primals let's go for Primal Kyogre and Groudon, versus Deoxys in the 5-star raids at the same time, the disparity was enormous. I think it would be quite good if they stopped having a 3 remote raid pass cap in your bag. Say you can get 5 per day. You can only buy 5 per day, but you can choose if you stack them up and don't use them on a certain raid boss or on a certain day and save them for later. I think that would be a bit more throwing it into the player's court. Give us the choice of where we put the amount of raid passes you get essentially per day, because thinking about it, how many of us look forward to Wednesdays because you can raid and do raid hour in every time zone? And I love Wednesday. I love waking up early, and if it's a good raid boss, certainly wake up, hit APAC, hit Australia's raid hour, then get some raid invites throughout Europe, 4 PM up to 6 PM, then hit my own raid hour in person Niantic, and then hit the East Coast raid hour remotely via the invites at 11 PM. If it's a good raid boss, I would quite like to be able to put a lot of my remote passes that I am allowed to use over a certain period of time into that one day. And I think there'll be a lot of people much the same court with that, because maybe people can only play on the weekends. We've seen that. People come out for community days, maybe they want to use more raid passes before and after. This could be implemented in a different way, having a limit on passes that you can use, but letting you choose when you use them. The way that Niantic have kind of shunned the online community that has been created over the last 3 years in so many different veins, over so many different platforms. Certainly, I have one as a creator, I have a Discord, it's got a global community in there. It's not massive, but there's certainly a lot of people in there. There are ones that are vast, absolutely vast, that are dedicated specifically to raiding globally. Some people really enjoy the global raiding function. The game isn't where it is, funnily enough, where it was in 2018, because 5 years have elapsed. So, time moves on, and I think it's actually been a very short-sighted thing of Niantic to not try and capitalise and perhaps engage or encourage with the global communities that have been created. There's a huge opportunity there that they could link in to their data collection in some way. They're very, very bloody-minded on this in-person data only. That might have all very well been okay when the game was in its infancy in 2016 and 17 and even 18. So much has developed and so much has changed. People's attitudes have changed massively. Certainly here in my local squad, not many people bother doing raid hour anymore. They'll do a remote raid or two when it suits them. They won't come out specifically to raid Lugia for the 475,000th time. It's not really massively interesting, even if you put these so-called XL Candy perks in place. And I think it's very foolish to be throwing away everything that's been created in the last 3 years and sort of saying, no, we've got to go back to this. Somebody in the comments may say, like, no, but remote raiding's staying. Yes, it's staying, but in a very, very, very minimal capacity. I don't see the in-person raids going and increasing in engagement massively on the back of it. We're just going to take a few segments from this. The whole article, I'll put the link in the description so you can read it if you want to. But Ed Wu has basically said a few things. In Niantic's eyes, remote raids have become too convenient a shortcut. There are a few other things that he mentions. Finally, we finish up with a more general chat about features players are hoping to see on the horizon, including shadow raids. We've seen shadow raids in the APK mines and stuff like that, and the eventual introduction of Pokemon God Arceus. So Arceus is in the works. That very well might be something related to GoFest in 2023, I think. This is an aside from remote raids, but why are we getting this information from a Eurogamer article and not directly from the article that was talking about remote raids? They should have put this in the end thing. I think, don't worry, we're having more information coming on in-person raids and these things, and shadow raids will be coming soon, and Arceus may appear at some time in the distant future. Again, that's sort of Niantic's poor communication, I think. The top section of this reads as follows. It's a big and meaningful change to a huge part of the game, as we've discussed. Of course, we've examined as many possible alternatives. And I saw that Trainer Tips, and I think Zoe as well, in their videos have said a lot of feedback has been fed to Niantic, and yet we've still arrived at this conclusion. Generally speaking, the goal is to keep remote raids as a part of Pokemon GO, but to do so in a sustainable way. The change is necessary for the long-term health of the overall game, and our principles of getting folks outside and exploring together. I know that's their favourite little thing to say, but it's really like getting folks outside so they can give us information and data. So if you want to turn off your adventure sync and all of that, go right ahead. Simply put, with remote raids priced at the same as in-person passes, there is no incentive to raid together. Together in person, they should have said. Meanwhile, the ease of raiding remotely has led to players raiding far more than Niantic intended, unbalancing the availability of Pokemon and the app's end game XL Candy Grind. Interestingly, bringing the XL Candy Grind into this one. Right, let's have a little talk about that one. Remote raids price is the same as in-person raids. That's not the only reason people don't raid in person. There are a lot more factors than just the price of the item in game that determine whether someone is going to go and raid in person. For example, if I can go and raid in person, I will do. Lots of things come into play, i.e. the weather. If it is absolutely atrocious out there, no matter what the raid boss is, I'm not going to go and do like a 30-minute to an hour long or whatever raid grind sesh, because I don't fancy getting soaked in the abysmal weather. Well, maybe some people can't physically get to the in-person raids or whatever. That's kind of a very over-the-top general sweeping statement and not really diving into the heart of the issues. Remote raids are preferable to in-person raids because they're easier to access, not just for people who can't get to in-person raids, mobility issues or whatever, or rural players like ProPlanty, who've also put out a video and made that point, but also just weather conditions and the fact that in-person raiding doesn't give you anything other than the very slim chance of one extra item. If in-person raids gave you XP boosts, Stardust boosts, guaranteed rare XL candy, I think a lot of us who could do would be out there chain raiding because people would like to actually get some rare XLs or maybe some poffins to put into their mythicals and things like that. Since that's not a function, people don't bother. I'll happily go and raid in Germany or raid in New Jersey as a preference, because then I can interact with my global community instead. The thing that interested me was the statement of, this has led to players raiding a lot more than Niantic intended. I don't really know where to go with that statement. So that this has made people raid more than Niantic intended. What do you expect people to do? Raiding has been a huge core function of the game since 2017, and then remote raids since 2020. I think it was even July 2020 when they were initially introduced with the invites. What are you expecting people to do? Do you want to cut back and control what people do with their gameplay? Because in terms of a shortcut and all of that, and this was something that ProPlanty mentioned, in the shop there are shortcuts for hatching eggs. If you have the ability or the want to put more money into your game, you can fast track and shortcut egg hatching. Have to walk less but hatch more eggs. You can also do the same with rocket leaders. You can buy rocket radars and stack them up and chain hitting rocket leaders rather than going around and interacting with the rocket grunts at various Pokestops and giving Niantic data. It seems like it's one rule for one thing and one rule for another. And we saw this back in last year's April, I think it was, with the Community Day reshuffle when it went from 6 hours to 3 hours. And they were saying, no, we want to get people, we want to not force, but we want to make sure that people meet within a narrow window because it's more likely to happen. And we want to cap how many people can get XLs because they felt that people who grinded for 6 hours were basically abusing the ability to get XL candy from the com days. That was a genuine point from Niantic, or one of the people at Niantic, saying, we don't like the fact that people can capitalise on 6 hours, it's an unfair advantage. But then they make adjustments to XL candy on the com days so that if you play for the full 3 hours and have a tier 3 mega, and you've seen this, possibly if you listen to the Incensed podcast, on every com day I run a tier 3 mega, I can get 2,000 plus XL candy for the com day mon, versus somebody who's rural, who doesn't have a tier 3 mega, and they get like 200. Inherently, the game is always going to be unbalanced in some way, and there were going to be shortcuts for various things. It feels like a bit of a cop-out, them saying these are the problems with the remote raiding system, and raiding is, happened more than we intended. I'm afraid, Niantic, raiding legendaries is kind of a big function in the game. People like raiding legendaries, they like getting shinies, they're good Pokemon. People will do it. So I don't know what you're expecting people to do. Are you expecting people to go and spin more Pokestops or, I don't know, catch more Weedle? I don't get it. I genuinely don't get that statement. As a heavily engaged daily player, it's pretty unusual for me to use 5 remote passes in a day, and it remains to be seen how often Niantic will lift the cap, as it says it might be for special events. Facepalm on some of this stuff, genuinely. There's another interesting statement from Woo here saying, generally speaking, the number of people who will be affected by the cap on a day-to-day basis is a relatively small part of the total set of folks who play our game. It's often sometimes useful to ground what the median player of Pokemon Go is. They're viewing this as a generalization, I think, but it still doesn't really excuse the fact that there might be people on one day of the week could hit 20 remote raids because they're available to, but they have inability to get to an in-person location because of mobility issues, or if they're a rural player and they're relying on remote raid invites and they can hit 20 raids in a day but not, the next 4 days. I think it's quite short-sighted of Niantic to take that option away from people and say, you will play this way. Funny enough, your function and your gameplay attitude, Niantic, doesn't fit and flow with everybody else's day-to-day interaction in life. A lot of people have got a lot of stuff going on. Pokemon Go it's meant to be, it's a mobile game, fundamentally. It's a mobile game, and it's there to be enjoyed when you can enjoy it. Not to have to go through and think like, oh, I've got to use the 5 remote raid passes per day, because if I don't use them, there'll be 5 remote passes done. So I have to log in and do this, even if it's a rubbish raid boss. So it might get to the point genuinely when you think, there's no legendaries and all of this, and I need to raid a Dedenne or something. I don't personally agree with what this dude is saying fundamentally, but that's my personal opinion. Now, I think a lot of potential issues with this whole nerf and this whole situation could potentially be not solved, but softened, shall we say, if Niantic Campfire, was actually available to everybody. And it's still not available to everybody, which I find astonishing because we're coming up to a year almost. It was introduced during the Go Fest for Seattle, I think, or just beforehand. And a bunch of invites, and then a bunch of people can invite and invite and invite. The fact that it's not still globally available is pretty bad, given that we've got, you can make global communities. You can make online communities on Campfire, by the way. There are lots of very good functions in there that might help people interact with people who didn't know were in your local area. If you're a fully rural player, it probably won't help you, but we've seen, for example, with the Elite Raids, it's quite a useful tool because you can then look at the raid map and say, like, right, there's this, and you can coordinate an individual chat for a gym, which is a very good function, but they're really getting way too far ahead of themselves with this because they're nerfing the remote raid experience that a lot of people rely on, but not providing the tools to be able to facilitate an option to help people get into the in-person raiding scene. It's still very much up to turn up at a raid location, possibly wait around for half an hour and hope that somebody else or enough people swing on by as well. You sit and waste half an hour of your life potentially just waiting and hoping that somebody turns up. I think we'll have a few more circumstances of that where people will want to go and do a tier 5 raid in person. They won't be able to get the people available. And because of the invite limit, people might be less willing to jump in and help out. I do wonder whether we have to do a sort of help the rural trainers or help the people who have mobility issues sort of thing. And so if you actually have no option to hit an in-person raid, then maybe we can save our remote invites and all of that for you. I don't know. It's something we're going to have to work out. Now, sort of to round out this possibly extremely long video, thanks for sticking with me. What will be the results of this? And I've seen many people on social media saying they're going to go free to play. It's fair enough, but as we've seen, if it was about money, in-game revenue, they wouldn't have implemented this change at all. In fact, what they would have done is they probably would have jacked up the price of the remote raids, but left it open, no cap, because then that would have generated a lot more revenue. People would have been mad about it, but remote raiders still would have probably gone for it. It's not about the money for them. It's about the in-person data collection that you provide by going around with Adventure Sync, by interacting and scanning Pokestops, by doing all of that sort of stuff in the game. So go to free to play if you feel like it, but I think there'll be 2 major shifts. People will stop playing. People will gladly put the game down because a game is meant to be enjoyed when you can do it, and how you like to do it. And if people have picked up the game in the last 3 years, have enjoyed the remote raiding, and suddenly it's unavailable or massively less available, they're not going to enjoy it, they'll move on to a different game. That's just the way of mobile gaming, Niantic, is that people will gladly put your game down. On the flip side of that, you might get the circumstance of they'll then push their marketing to new players, bring a new set of players in, and these new players will not even know that remote raiding used to be cheap or unlimited. That was something that Nick brought up, which is a very, very good point. But I think the biggest tide change that we're going to see, and I don't like this, but it will happen, people will turn to cheating. On the back of many years, 7 years, Niantic's crackdown on spoofers and multi-accounters has been very, very minimal, and you see it's still a huge problem. There are people who stream it, there are people who stream it all the time. I think people will turn to spoofing and people will turn to multi-accounting, because if you're multi-accounting with multiple devices, you can guarantee that an in-person raid, you will have the number of players that you need to take down the legendary. But then that actually doesn't fuel community local interaction anyway, because if it's really raining outside, you'll sit in your car with 4 accounts on 4 phones and do the level 5 raid, and you won't interact with anybody. In an effort to try and grow a local community or get people locally raiding, I think they'll actually encourage people to cheat to make it more convenient. And I guess just to say, my personal whole take on this thing is it does not sit well with me at all. I think this is a very short-sighted change, short-notice change, possibly done deliberately. It will cause more harm than good. The facilities to increase the want to basically go and do the in-person raids versus remote raids that are being nerfed isn't there, so people will just raid and not interact as much. Niantic have not exactly been on people's good books, certainly this year with the live events, Las Vegas and Regidrago. I think that they are on thin ice with a lot of members of the community, certainly maybe the people who are more present with the game. They've never been one to build up trust with their player base. We saw it with 2021 with Heroes Niantic and the Pokéstop distance and then the Community Day reduction. They're very quick to take things away, and that's not the right attitude. And something else that's just cropped up in my head, and it's something about mobile gaming. Many mobile games that have time limits on how much you can play. I'm thinking of Need for Speed No Limits, which is a mobile racing game, and a lot of mobile racing games require a fuel energy. Essentially think of it as like a raid pass to do an event. The equivalent of this would be you get 10 sections of fuel for Need for Speed No Limits, you get 10 remote raids in Pokemon GO. Once you've used those 10, it takes actual real life time to reset, essentially. So maybe you have a time cap on when those refresh. That's how Need for Speed No Limits does it. It takes a couple of hours to refresh all of your fuel before you can keep going and doing more events. Or you buy with real money and you can buy more fuel accessibility. And that's what I don't understand with Niantic and the way they run mobile games, is that there's no option for anybody who wishes to take their gameplay on a specific day or day to day and take it to the next level. Because if it's all about the game being balanced, well, I'm afraid the game's never going to be balanced, because people live in different areas, people play different styles, people have different things going on in their lives. Togetic Community Day, I'm going to be playing an Ealing. It's a very good spot. I'll be running my Tier 3 Mega and I'll be checking everything. I'll be trading everything afterwards for maximum XLs and maximum chance of hundos and shundos, etc. I'm going to have significantly more chance, by putting incubators and stuff into the com day, of getting more shinies and more XLs and more good IV ones than a rural player who has one stop, a handful of spawns, can't hatch the eggs. There's always disparity in terms of how people play the game. And using that as a reason to take function away from a game is very, very foolish. And I know that might have been a bit of a repeat of something I said earlier, but at the moment this is all I can really think of. There's a lot of thoughts and stuff put down, and fundamentally this is obviously a community discussion. There's a lot of community discussion going on social media, in my Discord, Twitter, certainly between individual members in my local community as well. So let me know your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. Will this change impact you as little as Niantic are saying? Does this impact you? Are you a hardcore raider? Will 5 remote raids per day be enough? Will it be too much? Will it be just right? What would you think about the fact that maybe if you could keep your 5 remotes per day and stack them up over the course of the week, so by the time you get to the weekend, you've got 25 remote passes that you've collected from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday you can do a bunch of remote raids that way. I think that would be an interesting function, but that's not what they've done, unfortunately. And of course, let me know if you agree or disagree with the vast amount of things I've said over the course of this video. But smash the like button and subscribe if you are new. I would greatly appreciate the support. We will be back out for the April Fool's event, which at this time we have no idea what's going on. And before I go, I do have to, of course, say thank you to everybody on the Patreon list who take the support up to the next level and support the content that is created. I have thoroughly enjoyed raiding remotely on a huge scale. Not as massive as maybe sort of the Hello Raider crew, on a pretty decent scale of remote raiding constantly with these wonderful people. All I can say is thank you very much for the last sort of 3 years, and we will continue to interact and remote raid, but unfortunately it's going to have to be to a lesser degree, and that deeply saddens me because of the wonderful global communities that we've built up over 3 years, and Niantic have tried to basically flush it down the bog with this, I would say. So that's all from me. I will see you all in the next one. Do take care.